Hi, my name is Ariana, and I've lived in a real bunker all my life. And only when I turned 16, I was finally able to see the world and another life that was boiling on the surface for the first time. And it gave me a lot of surprises and even troubles. My story begins 16 years ago when my mother gave birth to me. My parents were very happy, but they did not have time to enjoy their joy as they began to see on many different channels that the end of the world would soon come. Allegedly, it was predicted by the oldest tribe of people whose predictions came true one after another. Once they were able to foresee the Great Depression and the Second World War. Since my parents were always very impressionable people who believed in these predictions, they spent all their savings on buying a bunker. In just a few days, they were able to collect everything they needed for many years to come, and the day before the expected end of the world, they went down into the bunker with me. But nothing happened on the appointed day. My father received radio broadcasts from which he learned about it. My parents, just in case, decided to stay in the bunker for a couple more days and were about to leave, but suddenly it began to shake. The earthquake was so powerful and lasted for several hours. And then the connection with the outside world disappeared, and the outdoor sensors showed strong air pollution, a small proportion of oxygen, and a very low temperature. Then my parents were sure that the end of the world had come after all. And so we lived in the bunker for 16 years. My parents often told me what a wonderful life it was before the end of the world, but they also convinced me that everything had changed after the end of the world. There are probably only small, wild settlements left, and our civilization no longer exists, my mother said sadly. And I believed them. And what do you want from a girl who has spent her whole life underground? My parents have been saying all these years that one day we would come out when we were ready. Our mission would be to help the survivors and restore humanity. And when the long-awaited day came, I was really worried. It was scary to see the destroyed world, but at the same time, it was insanely interesting. Having dressed in protective suits, we opened the bunker and went out. It was dark and quiet around, but this was not surprising. We had chosen the nighttime for our outing so that the sun would not blind us. And then I was shocked when I saw a huge city that, it seems, was not destroyed at all. There were banners around, colored signs, and the lights of cars racing through the streets. My mother said that this place had changed over the years, but only for the better. They themselves could not understand how the world had recovered so quickly. The lights of the city and the noise were very frightening, and I was also terrified of the sky, vast and high, unlike the ceiling of the bunker. We went to the country house where my parents used to live. During all this time, it has noticeably aged and darkened. I ran inside and huddled in a corner with fear. I had an uncontrollable panic attack and a convulsive attack. My father left for help without taking off his protective suit. He came back alone, pale as chalk. On the street, they called him crazy and said that there was no end of the world. We spent 16 years under the ground in vain. My mother and I refused to believe it. But what about the earthquake and the sensor indicators? We found the answers the next morning. My parents looked into the mailbox and found 16-year-old editions among piles of newspapers. They wrote about a strong earthquake in the state of California. Coming to the bunker, we saw that the antennas and sensors were simply covered with the ground, and some of them were even broken. My dad apparently did everything in a hurry, so they went out of order. We had no choice but to accept the whole situation and move on. After selling the old house and the ill-fated bunker, we bought an apartment. But life on the surface was real torture. The sunlight was alien to me, and the noise outside the window was deafening. I closed all the curtains in the house and found my only solace, the television. It was also difficult for my parents because they could not return to their previous jobs because of such a long break, so they had to get a low-wage job. Because of this, we always did not have enough money, so my parents could not hire a psychologist for me to bring me to my senses faster. They could only hire a teacher for me. But he said that I needed to go to school so that firstly, I would still be in society, and secondly, I could master the school curriculum faster because my knowledge was at the level of the 5th grade. I didn't even think that was so stupid. I thought that my parents gave me enough knowledge, but apparently not. So the next day, I went to school with my father for the first time. I've heard a lot about it, but I never had a huge desire to go there. The prospect of getting up early for several years somehow did not please me because I was used to waking up when I wanted to. I was enrolled in the 5th grade, and my classmates reacted very strangely to my appearance. Well, of course, I was older than them and probably stupider. It was so weird that these little guys knew more than me. They laughed at me, but some helped. When we were asked to draw a lobster, I fell into a stupor, and everyone immediately reached for their smartphones. But I didn't have one, and I didn't know what a lobster was either. I was lucky that the girl at the next desk helped me. And at a break, everyone was shocked when they found out that I had no idea what TikTok and Instagram were. My little friends began to enlighten me, actively show me everything, and from such a flow of information, my head was spinning. I said that it was very difficult for me, and I was already living normally. But on the same day, I was convinced that this was not the case. This time I decided to go on foot because everyone wanted to walk with me, but they went home and I didn't know where to go. I was walking through an unfamiliar city with identical gray buildings and I didn't know where I was, and I walked like that until late at night. At midnight, the police finally found me in the park, crying on a bench. My parents were freaking out about my long absence. Then I got my first smartphone with a navigator. My father explained how to use it, and now with this smartphone, I was able to calmly reach my home by myself. However, there were other problems. Yes, I mastered a smartphone and even social media, but I could not do anything with my mind. I was still uncomfortable being in a noisy crowd and living at the pace of the city. I used to sit in the school bathroom and cry, and one day a psychologist saw me there. She asked me what had happened, and I told her everything. I thought Mrs. Norris would laugh at me like so many others, but she offered to help, and since then I went to her after school. Consultations with the psychologist gradually helped me to get used to society, and I even began to feel normal, which could not be said about my mother. One day, she had a panic attack at work because of a lot of noise. She began to shake, and then a real tantrum broke out. My mother was somehow brought to her senses, but this was followed by dismissal. It turned out that this was not the first time, and it scared the customers. Therefore, there's even less money in our family. Dad had to get a second job, but it was very difficult for him. He didn't show that he was also having a hard time adjusting to the new crazy world. My father did not have time for many things. He was moody and constantly suppressed a sense of fear of the outside world. It couldn't go on like this anymore, so we made a difficult decision to sell the apartment, leave the city, and move to a small village. Life there was calmer and more measured, but terribly boring. My parents became farmers, and I went to a small school, but this time I was enrolled in the 6th grade. But this did not help me to get rid of bygone glances and whispers. The children here were somehow distant and unfriendly, so I couldn't make friends with anyone here. And it was also very difficult for me to get used to it without the psychologist. I panicked. I started to shake when I was in the classroom with the children, and once I fell to the floor and I had an incomprehensible seizure. The teachers immediately called the doctors, and my classmates just watched and were afraid to do anything. The doctors came and brought me to my senses, and when they found out about my problem, they threw up their hands. There were no psychologists in this village, and I couldn't go to the city because I didn't have enough money. Neither the principal nor the teachers wanted to have a student with such a mentality in their school, so they expelled me to avoid problems. I thought that was it. I would never get an education because my parents could not hire me a tutor. However, one kind teacher still agreed to study with me for free because she was insanely sorry for me. I was grateful for that. And as soon as I thought that our life was beginning to improve, a tornado was seen in the fields near the village, which demolished everything in its path. I don't know how our house was able to resist, but it was a real miracle. But our entire vegetable garden, as well as the field where my parents worked, was badly damaged. The owner of this field suffered great losses, so he reduced the salaries of workers and also increased the amount of work. This led to the fact that we had to save on food and return to canned food, which made me sick in the bunker. Oh, how I hate it. But there was no other way out. I decided to help my parents earn money by working in the field in the evenings. But I was not good at working with my hands, so I was quickly fired. I didn't know what else to do because we were in an extremely desperate situation. More and more often, I thought that it would be better if we stayed in the bunker because everything was so familiar there and there were no big problems. I didn't like the outside world. I had dreamed of seeing it for so long, thinking it was a real paradise, but I was wrong. It was somehow difficult and unfriendly to me. I thought about it all day, and the teacher noticed that I was in a bad mood. She asked me what had happened, and I told her about my family's situation. She smiled and offered to work for her because her father was also a farmer and he needed help in caring for animals. I gradually learned everything and received good money. Gradually, our family not only got used to this world, but also managed to get out of debt. And after a few months, I was able to go back to school, which no longer scared me. Would you like to visit the bunker? Write your answers in the comments. Click on the thumbs up button under the video and share it with your friends.